Joining me now in studio is Dan Perry, international affairs analyst and former Europe and Middle East editor for the Associated Press. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Sure.
Dan, walk us through what happened this morning. What's behind Hamas's move to break the ceasefire? Were they out of cards to play? Is this a show of force?
I mean, one might believe that they're unable to find hostages, but I think probably Hamas is positioning itself towards the second phase where they're going to ask for a lot more per hostage. Their rate card basically is changing. And realistically, Israel will have to face the question of whether they're prepared to release serious terrorists who have been convicted of murders and who may be dangerous, like Yahya Sinwar himself proved to be, in exchange for the remaining hostages, about 130.
And Dan, obviously the fighting has resumed. The U.S. has supported Israel until now, but Blinken has reportedly warned Israel that it doesn't have months to dismantle Hamas, but rather weeks. Is that realistic of a timeline?
The army says they need 2 months. Clearly, the question is how much destruction in Gaza the world is prepared to tolerate during those 2 months. I would hope that the IDF really understands how critical this issue is and proceeds to the second phase of the war in southern Gaza and Khan Yunis and so on in a way that is both humane and rational and will enable Israel to maintain global support for what is ultimately the achievement of globally supported outcome, which is the removal of Hamas from power in Gaza. We need to remember most of the world, including most of the Arab world, very much supports the removing of Hamas from power in Gaza. This is no longer really a question of debate.
Dan, stay with me. I want to get your take on U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken was in Dubai today, where he said Hamas was to blame for the breaking of the ceasefire. He also discussed the future of Gaza. Take a listen.
It's also important to understand why the pause came to an end. It came to an end because of Hamas. Hamas reneged on commitments it made. In fact, even before the pause came to an end, it committed an atrocious terrorist attack in Jerusalem, killing 3 people, wounding others, including Americans. It began firing rockets before the pause had ended, and as I said, it reneged on the commitments it made in terms of releasing certain hostages. Here today, I had an opportunity to meet with a number of colleagues from across the region, and we focused our conversation on all 3 aspects of what we're doing. Today, the day after in Gaza, as well as the path to a durable, lasting, secure peace for everyone concerned.
Dan, I want to ask you another question here. Israel has reportedly informed several Arab states, this is according to Egyptian and local regional media, that it wants to carve out a buffer zone within the Palestinian side of Gaza's border to prevent future attacks against Israel. What can you tell us about that?
Well, Israel wants perhaps 1 kilometer of a buffer zone between its population on the Israeli side of the border and anything that follows in Gaza because, clearly, of the trauma of what happened on October 7th, where it became clear that a simple barrier is insufficient. Now, this is problematic, Sarah, because the entirety of the Gaza Strip is about 6 or 7 kilometers wide. So you're talking about a not inconsequential proportion of their territory. I think it's important for Israel to project that whatever happens hitherto is purely strategic and security oriented and not a matter of trying to control Palestinian territory or to take territory. This is going to be the narrative for sure. We see the war of narratives, and undoubtedly critics are going to say that Israel's trying to seize bits and pieces of Gaza. I think that the security aspect that is to come will be paramount, and it's so important for Israel to project that while security measures, including demilitarization of a future Palestinian Authority zone in Gaza, let's say, and indeed of the West Bank, is critical, there's a massive carrot alongside it because Israel will support the development of the civil society and on the other side as well.
With me here in studio is Dan Perry, international affairs analyst and former Europe and Middle East editor for the Associated Press. Thank you for staying with me. Meanwhile, amid the return to fighting, we're seeing the Emir of Qatar shake hands with the Israeli President Herzog on the sidelines of COP28 summit in Dubai. This is while his country is hosting the Hamas leadership. What do you read into that?
Qatar is one of the breathtaking aspects of this story. They have been a supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood. They are close to Iran. They also have tremendous ambitions to be a normative country on a world stage. They hosted the World Cup, and who knows what more they want to do. They want to be a respected and sought-after investor for their sovereign fund. So I think the world has a lot of leverage on Qatar, and that's important, because if the world deploys that leverage on Qatar, then Qatar can in turn put pressure on Hamas. There needs to be an entirely new reality in the moment after the coming operation in southern Gaza, where there is no legitimacy at all from any quarter that is respectable for the likes of jihadi terrorist nihilism. And I think Qatar is at an inflection point where they will help show us whether such a project is possible, and the entirety of the Arab world can be in effect normalized and brought into something resembling a global economic and political order that is useful. And Qatar is the linchpin of it. And by the way, I have to say, watching Efrat, good Lord, the ICRC is currently, the International Committee of the Red Cross, at a moment of tremendous it's a tremendously important pivot point for their legitimacy in the world. How on earth the ICRC can proceed, having not been given access to the Israeli and other nationals who are in Gaza, and hardly even complain, is mesmerizing. If the ICRC wants to be taken seriously going forward, this needs to change, and it needs to change immediately.
And we are hearing reports of a hostile intrusion in the northern border of Israel. We'll get more information on that. We are seeing what looks like live images of southern Israel. And as you can see on your screens there, it looks like rocket alerts in southern Israel. Dan, I want to ask you, amid all of this, we're seeing an increase in violence in Jerusalem and the West Bank. Yesterday, we saw 3 Israeli killed in a terror shooting in Jerusalem, and later a car ramming in the Jordan Valley. Meanwhile, hours later, Israeli settlers attacked Palestinian businesses in the West Bank. What is the security apparatus doing to keep a lid on this violence?
They're doing what they've always been doing, realistically. And at the end of the day, it's rather amazing that there isn't more violence in the West Bank, given the nature of the current Israeli government and the provocations that are being done upon the Palestinians. But in the final analysis, Hamas and Iran had hoped that their October 7th gambit would lead to all-out war, not only with Hezbollah and in the West Bank, but among Israeli Arabs in Israel itself. That hasn't happened. So while what happened yesterday in Jerusalem with the 3 deaths is a horrible tragedy, the bigger picture is that the West Bank has not yet exploded into an intifada, and Israeli Arabs are still loyal citizens, and so at the end of the day, for Hamas, it's a failure.